Staying in Pennsylvania, where the state's Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro has a message for Independence Day, one he's sharing with us first here on Morning Joe.
On this, the 250th July 4th of our independence, let us each ask ourselves, what will we do to meet our uniquely American responsibility? From the birthplace of our democracy and with a rising sun ahead, on behalf of all of us in Pennsylvania, ready to protect our freedom, happy Independence Day.
That's just a portion of that video. Governor Shapiro joins us now. Governor, good morning. Thanks for joining us ahead of this momentous week for you, certainly, in the state of Pennsylvania. We just saw John Meacham in Philadelphia. It has to be a sort of a humbling moment for you to be the man who's in the governor's chair on this moment 250 years later.
Deeply humbling. And speaking of chairs, that chair behind me in the video was the chair that George Washington sat in, a chair that Ben Franklin, one of our founders, who, by the way, only a handful of folks who signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, a chair that Franklin was fixated on. He was watching as the founders deliberated, and at the conclusion of the deliberations, he noticed that half sun on the chair that he was wondering, was it a setting sun or was it a rising sun? And he stood up and he told those delegates that he knew now that it was a rising sun. I think that speaks to the optimism that this country was founded on, the hopefulness that I still share today, even with all the challenges that we face. And I think Franklin, who Barnacle, by the way, big 76ers fan, hated the Celtics, but it was that
wow.
spirit. It was that spirit that I think Franklin then infused into this nation that we've carried with us for the last 2.5 centuries.
Governor, we don't have time to talk about one of your principal assets, Kyle Schwarber, but I do want to ask you about the phrase...
Fastest to 30, yeah.
Yeah. The phrase used in the clip that we just showed and the phrase that you just employed, a rising sun ahead of us. So that hopefully is for all Americans that will occur, and yet there are clouds hovering around that sun right now. Temporary status has been removed for hundreds of thousands of people. There are people who you know, who we all know, who work hard every day. They can't afford to go to the grocery store and then the gas station. They have to make a pick, one or the other. What do we do about getting this country more settled than it is now?
I mean, there's no question that people are hurting because of the chaos, the cruelty, the corruption of Donald Trump that is infecting everything, that is impacting lives, is hurting real people in my state and across the country. In many ways, though, our story in America has been our ability to overcome adversity. This isn't the first time our nation has faced adversity. But what we've done in every chapter of our American story is, despite the challenges, we've ended that chapter on a more hopeful note, with more freedom, more opportunity, more justice, more equity. I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but we are in the midst of writing that chapter, and it will be up to the American people, less people with titles next to their name, more ordinary Americans doing what Franklin said to that woman outside Independence Hall that Meacham referenced, defending our republic, keeping our republic. The work falls to all of us. That's why we need a national referendum this November on Donald Trump's chaos and cruelty and corruption. We need people to rise up and vote and be a check on this president and begin to see our way out of this darkness toward more light, toward more sun.
Governor, yesterday, despite Supreme Court's upholding of birthright citizenship, it appears that the court is just one vote away. It was a 5-4 decision specifically on whether the 14th Amendment enshrined those rights. We now have folks like Vice President J.D. Vance coming out and saying, hey, this isn't over. This is just hanging by a thread, birthright citizenship. It's clear that this conservative movement is planning on continuing this fight. What do you believe Democrats should do if they do regain the majority? Do you think that expanding the court or setting term limits for the court should be on the table?
I think everything needs to be on the table. I think we need radical reform that's actually going to ensure that the voices of the people are heard from, that the voices of the people are represented in the three branches of government. We don't have that right now. You know, the framers were incredibly concerned, Madison in particular, about an executive accumulating too much power. We've seen that because this Supreme Court, in one of its worst decisions over the last century, gave a president absolute immunity because a Congress of the United States has withdrawn from its responsibilities to be a check on the executive. We can begin to change that by voting. And after we vote, I think we need dramatic reform to give the voice back to the people. As for the decision yesterday, I mean, it is as clear as day in the 14th Amendment. This case should have taken a nanosecond to decide, and it should have been 9-0. I gather some of the justices were intimidated by Donald Trump sitting there in the court, staring at them, glaring at them during that decision. And then J.D. Vance comes along and says the quiet part out loud. It's one of the reasons why we have to win the United States Senate and not let them appoint a justice, should there be a vacancy, who would be younger, who would be there for a long time, and be more dangerous when it comes to eviscerating the rights of Americans. So bottom line here is we need real reform in this country. It's got to be people-centered and people-powered, and it's got to come as a result of people rising up, showing up at the ballot box, demanding more from their elected officials, and ushering in a new chapter in this country, one that gets us back to our roots of being more hopeful, more inclusive, and more just.
Governor, speaking of the ballot box, a lot of Democrats look to you as a leader of the party, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationally. I'm curious what you make of some of the results in these elections over the last few weeks. First in New York, where Democratic socialists, some with very extreme views, were elected. And then again last night, a 29-year-old Democratic socialist, Maila Quiros, upending a 15-term congresswoman. What is your read? Are those races specific to those districts? Or is there something else happening in the Democratic Party, whether it's a rejection of older candidates, young blood, or just a new view of the world in democratic socialism for Democrats?
Yeah, well, first off, I got to give a shout out to my good friend Phil Weiser, who I endorsed in that race in Colorado. Couldn't be more proud of him, excited. You know, we served together as attorneys general, stood up to the president's lawlessness, and I know he's going to get a lot of stuff done as governor of Colorado. I think as for the broader message, and we've seen this now in multiple states, I don't want to personalize this about any particular candidate, but what is clear as a through line is that there is real passion in the electorate. Part of that passion is just a desire to do what I said a moment ago, elect people who can be a check on Donald Trump's chaos and cruelty and corruption. But I think what you're also seeing is a lot of pain inflicted by this president and his enablers, ripping away health care here in Pennsylvania from 500,000 people, ripping away food assistance. Here in Pennsylvania, 140,000 of our neighbors do not have access to food assistance because Donald Trump and his enablers chose to give a tax cut to the people at the very top who didn't need it and pay for it with food assistance and with health care. I think you're seeing pain with rising costs at the pump because of the president's wrongful war of choice in the Middle East, that he didn't know why he went in, and he sure as hell doesn't know how to get out safely. And so I think you're seeing a lot of pain, and folks are channeling that into purpose. I think what is incumbent now upon any elected leader is to do what we do here in Pennsylvania, deliver results. Because I think a lot of the frustration, a lot of the pain that people feel, a lot of the passion that they feel to show up is they want to see things change. They want to see real results, the kind of results we deliver on here in Pennsylvania by bringing people together to get stuff done. And so that's what I'm seeing across the country. And that's the excitement and the passion and the real pain that I think people are speaking with when they go vote.
Do you worry, though, Governor, about some of these candidates in these high-profile races in New York and now in Colorado will be elevated as representative of Democrats nationally with some of their extreme views?
I mean, look, here in Pennsylvania, folks know what pragmatism, results, and getting stuff done looks like, because they see me, they see other Democrats who are doing that in our Commonwealth. Look, I want to work with anyone to get stuff done, Republican, Democrat, but where I disagree with folks, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to speak to that. I'm not going to bow to that. Look, I think some of the views I've seen expressed, say, for example, on public safety are wrong. People who want open borders and no prisons and no police, they're wrong. And we'll have a debate about that. But then there's other areas where I think we're going to find opportunities to all work together to move this country forward.
Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. I know you've got a busy week ahead of this 250th anniversary of this country. Thanks for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.